and a very interesting story that's emanating from Donegal Club Football. To bring us through the detail, I'm going to welcome Chris McNulty, sports writer for Donegal Sports. So good morning, Chris. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Thanks, Dave.
I said earlier that when we get these sort of PR issues, that the tendency for a lot of people is to immediately launch two-footed into the GAA, try and throw it into the same category as the Liam Miller game situation down in Cork, to the Newbridge or Nowhere situation. So I think it's probably good that we get the detail. Naomh Colmcille, which we should say is your local club up in Donegal, they're at the centre of a situation whereby they have been banned from staging adult games for 8 weeks. They've been fined €500 for breaching Rule 6.40 of the GAA codebook, which basically says you cannot play any unauthorised tournaments. What happened was there was a charity event launched for a local man who was diagnosed with motor neuron disease late in 2018. A game of football, a game of seven-a-side broke out on one of the Naomh Colmcille pitches. Let me know if there are any inaccuracies there, and have I summed up the situation?
Yeah, that's perfectly right, Dave. There was a fundraising drive back in February. There was a weekend-long series of events to raise money to refurbish the home of Paul Dillon, a local man in Newton Cunningham who received the devastating diagnosis of motor neuron disease late in 2018. Guy who's at the hub of the community, who was at the heart of the GAA club for a long number of years, has coached so many of us. Back in our underage days, back in the 90s, from really the rebirth of the club in the mid-1990s, Paul Dillon was at the centre of it. So as part of this weekend-long fundraising drive, there was a tournament organised, I should say, by an independent local committee headed up by the local councillor, Paul Canning, who sought permission from the GAA club to use their facilities at Park Colmcille as part of the fundraiser. And the club, I suppose, sought permission initially from Croke Park and were turned down late in that week, and sought also, I believe, permission from the Donegal County Board and were turned down also. But at some point on the weekend, I think the club sort of decided to do possibly the neighbourly thing and do the decent thing. And, you know, I just made the point to Tommy, the producer, just before I joined, you know, there's uproar now on one level, but can you imagine, Dave, the uproar locally in a small local community if the GAA club had refused to give their facility for such a fundraiser?
Yeah, there would be a very different debate going on in the local area. I understand that completely. So what were the grounds on which the application to stage this tournament, and it seems to only have been one game, it's not quite that it was even a tournament, but what were the grounds on which, both by the GAA and by the Donegal County Board, that Naomh Colmcille were refused permission to actually allow this game to take place?
Yeah, so I suppose as well as Rule 6.40 of the official guide, which deals with unauthorised tournaments, Naomh Colmcille have also actually been sanctioned under Rule 5.1, which deals with the use of property, and basically it's only for the purposes of playing Gaelic games. Now, there's suggestions that there was a game or games of soccer played on the field, but my understanding is when the club made the application initially, it was as a fundraiser. And I think what I'm led to believe is it was turned down on the grounds that it wasn't a fundraiser, it wasn't a GAA fundraiser. So it was a fundraiser for an external body. So basically, had the club disguised this as a GAA club's fundraiser, and a few days later the club committee presented a cheque to this fundraising committee for Paul Dillon, then I believe it wouldn't have been an issue. So the fact that it wasn't a GAA function or a GAA tournament or a GAA fundraiser, then that's where the problem lay.
On the face of it, it's another PR disaster, and to say that it's a PR disaster for Croke Park is probably a bit premature, but given that this specific issue it's a million miles from Croke Park right now. They haven't been involved in any of the decision making. This is very much down to the Donegal County Board, and it is the County Board that will be involved in the appeals process as well, because we should say that Naomh Colmcille are appealing the 8-week ban from all adult games taking place and the €500 fine. But the argument can be made, Chris, that there is a rule book, there is a code of conduct, there are guidelines in place by which the GAA is run, and every organisation needs a rule book in place, otherwise anarchy and chaos reigns. Now, that is not to suggest that we're remotely close to that in this situation. Is it not more of a case that it's the rule is the problem, rather than the GA enforcing the rule book, because the GA has to do that.
Yeah, I think, to be fair, I would have a degree of sympathy for the decision makers on the county board, given that the first issue here is that there was an official complaint and there was a number of items of correspondence sent to the Donegal County Board regarding this fundraiser. So when they get a complaint in writing, or when they get pieces of correspondence like that, they're duty bound as officers to act, and that's what they did. They consult the official guide. It's a pretty lengthy document. The rules are there in black and white. I suppose the issue maybe that certain people have here is that if we go back to February, and around about the same time as this fundraiser was happening, annual Congress was taking place, and the rules were changed somewhat following the Liam Miller debacle in Cork, whereby county grounds can now host non-Gaelic Games events or non-Gaelic Games functions, but that rule change doesn't go down to club level, so it doesn't cover the likes of Park Colmcille and Newton Cunningham to do similar as, you know, the Liam Miller function or the Liam Miller game in Park Equive, which was on a bigger scale, but I suppose along the same principles and along the same lines. It was a fundraiser for, you know, for a certain cause.
I understand the point you're making about the Donegal County Board, that if someone has made this complaint to them, the rules are in place and they can't be seen to be picking and choosing what cases they rule on and what cases they just sweep under the carpet. Because yes, this rule looks archaic and it looks completely unsuited for the purposes that it was put in place when you put it alongside the purpose of this fundraising campaign. I think €85,000 was raised, and for a parish of 1,500 people, that's extraordinary for what they've done for this man and for his family. But at the same time, it's something you would ask yourself, who are the people that have complained to the Donegal County Board that this game has taken place? And I'm not looking for names or anything. I don't even know if you know who these people are, but there are still people within the GAA that see it necessary to put on paper a complaint of this nature surrounding an event of this nature.
Yeah, that's for me. Look, you know, the rule book is one thing, but the rule and the archaic way it's written, or the archaic sort of way that it's put in the official guide, is a problem. But this is only a problem because its head has been raised by someone or by some people to the county board. To me, and I suppose it's maybe a very Irish thing to say, and you know, a very local thing to say. You know, we should have just turned a blind eye. But in reality, there was a guy here who gave his life and soul to his community, to his parish, to his club, and he received such a devastating illness. I mean, this guy is the butcher in the local shop. I mean, he's just sort of your quintessential Irish GA man. He's everything in the community, and there was a fundraising drive to make repairs to his home. It raised 85,000. This tournament itself raised over 5,000. I think 5,200 was the figure. It was just an amazing show of community strength. And now the unfortunate thing about it is we've got this man, Paul Dillon, who we're talking about and whose name is in headlines this morning for all the wrong reasons. I mean, this guy is going through a tough enough battle, but now his name has been sort of by association dragged through by this unnecessary complaint. I would suggest, look, you know, again, I go back, the rules are there, the rules are quite clear, but there's sometimes maybe the unwritten rule of common sense should probably come into play.
I don't think the GAA should be totally vilified on this, you know, because the GAA...
well, that's if we know that this was not initiated, that the whole process was not initiated, Chris, by the Donegal County Board.
Yeah, yeah.
Like if this was an external complaint, if this was someone from Naomh Colmcille or somebody that was at the game, a member of the public, it's a different story. Do we know whether it was the process was initiated in that manner, Chris, or was it the Donegal County Board and their disciplinary committees themselves that decided something needed to be put in motion here?
No, my information, Dave, is that the Donegal County Board acted on a complaint or complaints.
Okay. So that goes to your point, Johnny.
Yeah, and in fairness, Chris, you know, whoever made the complaint, what his or her motivation is for this is kind of questionable at best. But you look at the FAI over the last month or so, and as archaic as the GAA is, it's a very democratic process. It has its flaws. It's probably belongs to another era in ways, but there's certainly an element of a lot of football people out there who'll be slating the dinosaur that is the GAA this morning on the basis of this, but be very careful what you wish for, and look what the FAI has done, and the GAA has an awful lot to be proud of, and shouldn't be, I think, vilified for trying to stick by the rules, as archaic as they might be.
Yeah, it reminds me of the complaint that was made to the Garda Síochána on the back of the blasphemy that surrounded Stephen Fry at the time, where it was clearly a complaint on that occasion, I think, that was almost done tongue-in-cheek in a bid to actually just show publicly how archaic a law it was. But the Gardaí, they had to question Stephen Fry. They were left in no... They couldn't just decide, well, we deal with some complaints, we don't deal with others. They were duty-bound to see that process through to the end. And that's probably the situation with the Donegal County Board here. And without wishing to preempt the outcome of the appeal, Chris, do they have grounds on which they can appeal this? I'm sure there are people working for the club. Maybe there will be people acting as some sort of an intermediary in between as well to try and get the outcome that resembles common sense as closely as possible once this process has reached its conclusion.
Yeah, well, the club have requested a hearing. That hearing, I think, is possibly due to take place next week. Now, the club, as it stands, the club senior team have a game in Division 3 against St Mary's of Convoy this Sunday scheduled. That goes ahead. So basically, until this hearing, things motor on as normal, I suppose. But if we look at the rules and look at the way that the rules are written, they're quite clear. But I think, the club here is probably going to plead a certain element of just being neighbourly, of being sort of charitable. And I know maybe that sort of isn't in keeping with the way the rules are written or intended. It should also, I think, be noted on this that the grounds concerned are actually owned by the parish. They're vested in the GAA, yes, and everything from the front gate to the back hedge, I suppose, is vested within the GAA. But it is a community-owned facility, and when it was initially bought and initially developed, it was intended for the use of the whole community. And I suppose with events and with people like this in mind, that again, it's a small community, Newton Cunningham, but the club caters for people from four villages in the border area, and even putting all 4 villages together, it's still quite a small area. And going back to the development of the club and the development of the facility, it was intended as being for the community, the whole community. Again, that maybe doesn't fit with the GAA's rules, but it's possibly an angle that the club may go down in their appeal, that they're just maybe going to appeal to people's better judgment, perhaps.
Chris, thanks a million for taking the time to chat to us this morning.
No worries, guys.
That's Chris McNulty, a writer for the Donegal Sports Hub. It's a really sad situation, and here's a man who is now hearing his name being discussed in shows such as this. His name's been mentioned in a lot of the newspapers, both locally and nationally, and he probably thinks that some of the money that has been much needed money that's been raised to help him in his fight to deal with the MND is tainted somewhat, and that's a really sad part of this. I don't blame the GAA for this. You could blame them for a couple of other things that have happened over the last year or so in terms of them struggling to get ahead of the story and the narrative. I certainly don't blame them for this one. I do blame the person or persons that have made this complaint. And I wonder how they're sleeping at night when they hear the story being discussed in this detail, and they see the tweets from Eamon McGee, and they see what they have caused by making such a petty, unnecessary, lacking in common sense and any sort of decency complaint to a Donegal County Board who now feel that they are bound to the rule book and have to see this through. Yeah,
I mean, certainly he or she isn't a person I'd be too happy or kind of buzzing to go for a pint with, considering the good that's been done here. And the prevalence of MND, the amount of times you hear of somebody being stricken with it, and the difficulty it entails to go through with that debilitating disease, and for that person who just sounds like as Chris was saying, a perfect sort of Gaelic games character within the community, the butcher and all that. He didn't need this at all. He's enough of a battle ahead, and his family has. And I couldn't agree more with you, but I wouldn't be vilifying the GAA for trying to stick by its rules.
Yeah.